I will introduce our speaker for today and let her fill in some of the blanks. But again, welcome to our 20th quarterly roundtable meeting. Our guest today is Susie Boxman of the Environmental Research and Education Foundation. Dr. Boxman is the Data and Policy Program Manager at EREF's, which directs and funds scientific research that advances sustainable waste management practices. And I was happy to note she, like me, is an EPA alumni. That was her first job at EPA on sustainable materials management and the America Recycles efforts. She completed her PhD in environmental engineering at the University of South Florida. And I'm so very happy you're able to join us today and share some of the results of your research at EREF. Do you call it EREF or EREF?
EREF, I think is
EREF.
usually.
Okay,
EREF.
that's much better. Yep. I like that better. EREF.
Kind of catchy, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you all for joining. I'm really excited to talk to you all about some of the work that we've been doing at EREF that I think relates to everyone's interest on the phone or on the webinar, call, Zoom, whatever you want to call it. So I mean, since this is a pretty small group, I think feel free to stop me if you have questions. I'm gonna go through maybe just some general background on EREFs. I'm not sure how much everyone on the meeting is aware of what we do. And then I struggled kind of coming up with a title for this presentation because I am going to talk about our anaerobic digestion survey, which some of you might have seen was open kind of over the summer, our past anaerobic digestion state of practice report. But then I also wanted to cover some other things that I think will be of interest to everyone. One is a little bit of information about our Pfas work, and then also a recent report that we have that came out over the summer looking at organics management in Canada. So it includes both anaerobic digestion in Canada and also composting. So just the general mission and vision for EREF. So these actually, if you're familiar with EREF, we're actually just recently updated these to be a little bit more with the times. So the general mission is to advance scientific research and create education pathways to enable innovation and sustainable waste management practices. The big change here is in our vision, where we've kind of shifted our language from being focused on just sustainable waste and managing waste to working towards this circular economy concept and how we can manage resources more effectively and more holistically. So we've been around for a little while, founded in 1992, and it's important to note that not only are we a nonprofit organization, but we're also a non-lobbying and non-advocacy organization, and we don't have any members. So all of our funding comes through donorships and through a couple of fundraising events that we do. And so part of the reason this is really important is because we are a research organization. And so by not having members, by not advocating and not lobbying, the goal is to add an additional bit of credibility to the research and work that we do, because that's, we do the science and that's what's important to us. So how we go about fulfilling our mission, we do it in a couple different ways. One is through our research program, where we provide research dollars to university professors as well as students. And so far, we've funded over $16 million and 116 projects since that program started. We also provide scholarships to students. A lot of them are most commonly PhD students, but we also provide funding to master's students. And so we've had 95 scholars since 1998 and given away about $2.3 million to those students to support their work and careers in the waste industry. And then the last piece is the data and policy program. Once upon a time, it was called the internal research program because that's exactly what it does. It's our program, the program that I run, to be able to allow us to do research on topics in the waste management industry that are important, where maybe there isn't information available and it just doesn't make sense to necessarily fund a university researcher to be able to do that work. It's something that we want to be able to do ourselves. And so, so far we've done kind of 18 reports since we started in 2014. Since I got here, we have a lot of work going on. So We're just constantly trying to generate information and be kind of a hub of resources for all different management pathways for waste and materials, including anaerobic digestion, but landfilling, recycling, every option that there is, right? So just to give you a little bit of a additional flavor of all of the different types of projects we do, the one of our bigger projects that we're currently working on updating is our update to the Municipal Solid Waste Management Report. We did this report previously and collected data on 2010 and 2013. The update we're working on is for 2016 and 2019. So we're working towards building kind of a longitudinal data set, collecting information about where municipal solid waste goes across the US. And so I would imagine many of you are probably familiar with EPA's Facts and Figures report. So we take a different approach in our MSW management report, where instead of kind of doing the EPA approach, which is modeling based and top down, we do a facility based approach where we directly get the data from facilities to come up with an estimate for MSW generation. So this is really for the anaerobic digestion work that I'm going to talk about. That's where it fits. It is basically our facility survey to generate the data that's going to feed into this update to the MSW report. One of the other things that we do is an annual tipping fee report. So this is maybe a little bit off topic here because it is focused on landfills, but it's one of our most popular reports. We do it every year, tracking landfill tip fees across the United States. And we usually throw in something additional. So we've looked at construction and demolition waste tip fees. Last year, we did something looking at how tip fees relate to population in a case study of North Carolina. This year, we're probably going to do something related to tip fees and how they relate to remaining landfill airspace. We also do work on composting. So one of the projects that we are currently have underway is the state of practice on composting. So this will sort of be similar to the anaerobic digestion state of practice report that we put out in 2016, but it'll be more focused on composting facilities. And that we're working on a survey for that effort. Again, it kind of feeds into this MSW management report, but it also will function as a standalone report looking at composting more broadly. And then the kind of, that's all sort of facility-based things, but we also look at other parts of the waste sector. So one of the projects that we're doing is looking actually waste collection vehicle fleet management. So all of the materials have to get from point A to point B. What are the vehicles that are being used to do that? And how are they maintained? How can we improve upon those maintenance practices and provide information to the industry for managing their fleets for moving all of this stuff around? Actually, so I included a lot of links into the presentation, and so I will definitely send this out, and hopefully the links will work as intended so that you can get to all of these reports if you want to get more information or miss anything that I say or anything like that. So I have 2 projects on here, but I realize we actually just don't have enough information yet about the, oh no, that's the Canada report. Sorry, I forgot what I put in the slides. But so I wanted to talk about our anaerobic digestion report and then also provide information about our state of practice of organic waste management report in Canada, which I already mentioned. So I will just move on. The one thing that I threw in this morning as I was looking around on the website, I noticed that Pfas is a big interest for everyone. So I wanted to make sure that everyone was aware that we do also a lot of work related to Pfas. Oftentimes it's more landfill focused, but one of the resources that we have that I think is really interesting and could be useful is a database of Pfas related research. So there's over 600 research articles in this Excel spreadsheet. We organized it, have summary information about all of the articles. We have background information. The little image I have shown here is kind of just a grab from our website where we have kind of this general information about what is Pfas, where is it, different things like that. And then the other bubbles figure shows you of all of the resources we looked at, this is sort of the breakdown for what we found. So a lot of it is kind of in this toxicology area. but we do have some resources related to food, resources related to generally the environment, solid waste management, etc. So it hopefully is something that folks are finding useful for them to be able to go and find out what the state of science is related to PFAS. I guess as then kind of another little plug, and I'll make sure Janie has this information. We also do, we call them our science webinars. And these are every 4 to 6 weeks or so. We just restarted our series, and a lot of the topics that are covered are related to PFAS. And so it could also be something that's of interest to everyone. If that's a topic that you want to learn more about, we have a lot of resources. So getting into kind of the data that I have to show for today. So this, like I kind of said before, it really covers 2 different things. One is our state of practice report that we released in 2016, but then also the update to our MSW report, but also just this general information we've been collecting on anaerobic digestion facilities, looking specifically at data from years 2016 and 2019. So what was our 2016 report? So it was really just supposed to be a state of the practice. It has background information about different anaerobic digestion technologies, how they're used for managing municipal solid waste. We did an analysis trying to get record for how many facilities there were in the US. So this report came out before the EPA started doing their anaerobic digestion survey work as well. So it's a little bit different than that report, and some of the information is similar, but hopefully it's also still a helpful resources with this background information. We do some policy analysis in the report, looking at the policies that were relevant at the time, and then have manufacturer information. So there's a lot in there. It's worth taking a look. Even now, I think it has a lot of good information. And so then the other part of this is our survey update. So we've done a couple of interesting things as we've been working to update our numbers. One of them was a more focused effort on identifying wastewater treatment plants that do co-digestion, and using that to get a better estimate for how much municipal solid waste is managed at those co-digestion facilities. But then just generally also looking at how the number of facilities has changed over time, and how the amount of waste is processed has changed over time. So you can see, so there's, to an extent, you can see that the number of facilities between 2013 and 2019 has grown. But the caveat there is that we also did a much better job finding facilities in 2019 because there are more resources available. Well, when we started this research kind of in 2013, 2014, the EPA's Further with Food efforts didn't exist yet. I think we had biocycle resources, but some of the other resources that are available now weren't out there. You know, we had the Ag Star resources, we had internet searches that we did, we have resources available from biocycle, and that was pretty much it. And so we supplemented it as best we could, and we found everything that we could. And so I think at the time we felt pretty confident in these numbers, but now we definitely acknowledge that between our own work and all of these other resources that are out there, we saw this kind of increase in facilities, which is maybe a little artificially inflated just because we had other ways of finding them. And well, that being said, the wastewater treatment plant numbers actually are probably different than what you'll find in other resources, because how we went about getting this is actually taking a sample of all of the facilities in from the WEF database of anaerobic digestion facilities that are associated with wastewater treatment plants. So it wasn't necessarily clear. There was a list of facilities that have co-digestion, but since we're focused on co-digestion of municipal solid waste, it wasn't clear whether or not they were digesting just their residual biosolids or whether or not they were doing co-digestion. So we actually did a survey effort specifically on wastewater treatment plants where we called those facilities, tried to identify whether or not they co-digest, and then use that to extrapolate out an additional estimate number of wastewater treatment plants that do co-digestion. So these statistics are from 2013. They're from our report. We don't necessarily have updated information that I can share right now from the more recent survey effort that we've done, but it is sort of interesting and gives you a breakdown for where private ownership of anaerobic digestion facilities lies. So for a standalone facility, as you might expect, a lot of them are privately owned. We did find in our previous work that there were some that were publicly owned, with some being owned by universities or other public entities. When you look at co-digestion on farm facilities, you see the same thing, where a lot of them are privately owned, with the outlier being the wastewater treatment plants. Since they're often public utilities, they're going to be an example of something that's publicly owned, and not very many are privately owned. So into the actual survey data. So this is some of the information from our updated survey. So what we saw was that food waste and fog are most commonly what's accepted at these different types of facilities, pretty much regardless of the type of facility, whether it's standalone, on-farm, or co-digestion. And then a lot of where the waste is coming from is from the agricultural/industrial sector and commercial sectors. So the pie chart there shows you that 39% in blue is from the agricultural industrial sector, and then the big red 38% is the amount coming from the commercial sector. So the ag industrial would be examples of like processing wastes, and the commercial would be kind of your restaurant industry and grocery stores and that sort of thing. In terms of the feedstock types, so the bar chart I have up here, you can again kind of see the breakdown for where of the type of feedstock, where it's coming from. So you can see that food waste is most commonly coming from that ag industry and industrial industry, whereas agricultural waste is, it's kind of a silly question, right? But all of the agricultural waste comes from the agricultural/industrial industry. I have yard waste on here, and so we did get some facilities that indicated that they received yard waste, and so the majority of that is 80% of that is coming from the municipal residential sector. But keep in mind that the number of facilities reporting having yard waste was very, very small. It was probably only a handful of facilities, but those facilities predominantly got it from that municipal residential area. Since we are interested not only in the solid waste part of it and the MSW part of it, we were also interested in the collection. So we had a question in there trying to determine where facilities are getting their feedstocks from. And so for the most part, actually all of this is third-party collection, with the exception of the agricultural industrial waste, where facilities will self-collect that on their own. So then I think this is kind of the last little bit of data I have on this project, was looking at the actual tonnage factors. So how has that changed over time? So you can see between 2013 and 2019, pretty much across the board, with the exception of the 2016 wastewater treatment facilities, there is a slight dip there in their tonnage, but overall everything has increased between 2013 to 2019. You'll notice that for the standalone facilities, while the total amount of tonnage has increased, the average monthly tonnage has changed. And part of that is because of the change in the number of facilities that we identified. That also is probably a little bit reflective of why the tonnages have increased, is greater number of facilities identified between 2013 and 2019. But between 2016 and 2019, you still see an increase, and that would be representative of the same number of facilities. So I think what you can see from this is that not only has the number of facilities likely grown between 2013 and 2019, but the amount of MSW going to those facilities has increased over time as well. And then I guess a little shameless plug here. So I do say on the side that there is some uncertainty for the 2019 data because we haven't necessarily got a great response rate from our survey for standalone facilities. We've had like amazing response from the wastewater treatment facilities and pretty good response from on-farm, but the standalone facilities, the survey is still open. So if any facilities have not participated, or if you know any facilities owners, like those on the call, and you haven't participated, we would still love to get responses to make sure that our data is really robust. So that's still an option. These are really just our preliminary results based on what we have so far. And then I also thought it might be interesting to see how this has changed regionally. So this is the figure from our 2016 report showing where all of the tonnage that's managed, also where the location of the facilities are, with the different little pictographs for standalone on-farm and wastewater treatment plants. So in 2013, a total of 784,000 tons were managed, and the majority of that was managed in the Pacific. We see then the second largest amount of tonnage was managed in the Midwest, followed by the Northeast.
Interesting choice for using the toilet as your pictograph for wastewater treatment.
Yeah.
That's all right. You can't take yourself too seriously.
I mean, people know what it means. It's clear.
Can I ask you a question about this data, though? Did you forward the slide?
I did. So I'll go back to 2013.
Okay, yeah, great. So it has 6 of the wastewater treatment facilities for the Northeast. Because that's just because you're looking at co-digesters with food waste. Okay. Because I think Sherry, you did a presentation one time and showed how many AD facilities there were at treatment facilities in this area. But it was more than that, so that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I think Massachusetts alone has about that. Yeah.
Okay, but that explains it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and that's a good point. So then on this slide, which shows the 2019 data, this actually doesn't represent all of the co-digestion facilities because some of that is an estimate, right? We did this sampling protocol where we surveyed wastewater treatment plants, and based on the number of facilities that said, yes, we do co-digestion, we extrapolated out for all of the facilities. Because we're extrapolating those numbers, we don't actually know where they're located. So the numbers you see here, particularly only for wastewater treatment co-digestion, are low because in our tonnage estimates, we identified a greater number of co-digestion facilities. But this is representative for the standalone and on-farm facilities that we identified.
But that looks right. I mean, that looks like a pretty good estimate if you're just talking about co-digestion.
Yeah, okay. And so looking at kind of the changes over time, the Pacific still manages the most of it, but we actually saw some changes where the Midwest and the Northeast and the Southeast, actually, all of those tonnages, the amount, the percent that are managed in those areas increased. And so then there were some decreases in other areas based on kind of the averaging out of where everything was going. But still kind of the similar trends of the areas that were managing the most before are still managing the most now. So that is officially all of the work on our anaerobic digestion, state of the practice report, as well as the survey updates. So that brings me to the next thing that I kind of just wanted to talk through is our state of practice for organic waste management and collection in Canada. I bring this up for a couple of reasons. One, because it was a big report and I'm excited to talk to people about it, but also because a lot of the work that we're doing here is similar, the methodology is similar to work that we're starting to do with the US Composting Council to look at composting in the United States. So the objectives of the study in general were to look at the policies, programs, and permits across Canada and how they are applied for organic waste management. We wanted to look at where diversion programs exist, so who has access to the ability to divert their organics, both beef and yard waste, as well as food waste, get an estimate for the total amount of processing infrastructure. And so we were looking at those composting facilities and anaerobic digestion facilities, and then kind of get an estimate for how much waste is generated, how much of it's being diverted and disposed of across the country. So the first part is looking at these policies and programs. So I think that this is interesting and potentially could be transferable to the United States for areas that are interested in seeing what Canada is doing and whether or not they would be appropriate. But in general, in terms of the goals that most of the provinces had, and really looking at the provincial level, for this analysis, we did an analysis of federal policies and programs, and then at each provincial level. So it's not necessarily the not the local level policies and programs, because that was a little bit too outside of the scope of what we were looking for. But what we see is divert from disposal. 10 of the 14 provinces and territories have some sort of goal in or documented goal that they want to divert waste from disposal, specifically organic waste. 7 out of the 14 wanted to reduce waste. We saw reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And then I guess actually a lot of them also had some sort of combination of these because it isn't necessarily one goal that's going to be motivating. So they might have had 2 or even 3 or 4 of them in their different reported policies. So in terms of the mechanisms for how they're trying to achieve these goals, we saw 7 different general types of policy mechanisms, and these were kind of varied, but again, kind of in line with their main goal of diverting from disposal. We saw diversion being one of the really common policy mechanisms for how they can achieve their various organic waste goals. Tax incentives was another one that was pretty popular. We specify in the report a little bit more about the tax incentives as well. Source separation being another common one, and disposal bans. I guess I'm a little surprised looking at this now that diverting from disposal maybe was the main goal, but disposal bans was not as common as you might expect based on that main goal. We didn't find any provinces when this report was being finished that had extended producer responsibility policies, but there were 2 that had them kind of under consideration.
Susie, could you just expand a little on what you mean by offset credits in this context?
Yeah,
I've heard of it in like carbon trading context, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I think it is similar in that having an offset credit for the carbon emissions associated with reducing organic waste.
Do you happen to know which province that was? Because
I don't offhand, but I can look it up.
NEBRA has some of the Atlantic provinces in our area, and I'm just curious. Interesting.
Yeah. So then in order for any of these provinces to meet these goals, they need to be able to divert their waste and curbside and drop off organics. Residential programs to be able to manage this is going to be an important piece of that. So one of our big questions was, well, who has access? And so this is an overestimate because it's based on people who lived in an area that had access to a program. So you're automatically overestimating there because not every single person is going to use a program, even if they live in an area that has one, but it also doesn't necessarily take into account different types of residential property and whether or not single family homes might have access, but multifamily buildings do not. So this is really kind of the best case scenario for the number of people that could have access to a program in terms of curbside, but similarly with drop off, just because people have a drop off program doesn't mean that they're going to take their waste there. But so the way that we did this work was just doing a survey of not all, but most cities across the country, and then doing web searches to identify whether or not they had access to a program or not. And so you can see that a lot of people, particularly when you're thinking about leaf and yard waste, 91% of the country has access to a leaf and yard waste program. And so one of the big reasons for that is that was implemented in the 90s, that folks needed to have access to leaf and yard waste disposal. But even when you're looking at source separated organics, there's definitely a lot of folks that have access or at least live in an area that has a program, with 74% of the population living someplace with the source separated organics program. And similarly, and so just thinking about the source separated organics, 71% of the population lives in an area with a curbside program. So that's the most common way for those source separated organics programs to exist. And then my slide kind of notes the caveats here, that it's going to depend on the location, the program, the residents' participation. So then the last piece is, well, where are the facilities? How many facilities are there, and how much tonnage are they managing? So the map here shows, with the legend, all of the different compost facilities and anaerobic digestion facilities that we identified. You can see that there are a few places where there's kind of clusters of those different types of facilities. And then the table over here shows the total number of facilities identified for each province or territory. And so Ontario and Quebec, like you can see in the figure, had the greatest concentration of these facilities, since they have pretty strong organics management programs at this moment. So how much waste is processed? So we saw that 4.83 million tons of organic waste was processed in 2019, and the majority of this was processed by compost facilities. And a lot of it really was the leaf and yard waste. That being said, there's a lot of variation in how much tonnage facilities are processing, because we were trying to be comprehensive. We covered things from facilities that were so small, they didn't have scales, and they were estimating, I have a pile and the pile is X high, to facilities that were larger, commercial facilities that had were able, had scales and were able to provide us with tonnage information. So the amount of tonnage ranged from 50 to 150,000 tons. And so when you look at kind of the averages in this table, so the average tons of organic waste processed, we have the standard deviation there, and those numbers are really big because there was this really big variation in the size of the facilities. So a compost facility, on average, of those 328 facilities, they processed about 10,000 tons, but that factors in this variation in size of those facilities. And so the anaerobic digestion facilities, looking at this, they only did 28% of the total amount of organic waste managed in the country, but in terms of an average, they were processing more organic waste on average, because they're likely larger facilities and more capable of managing a greater amount of waste. So then, one of the questions that you might be interested in, okay, so that's how much waste they're processing, how much more waste could they potentially process? So what we found was that most places have plenty of available capacity if you're going to manage basic degradable wastes. There's plenty of capacity for leaf and yard waste. But if you want to add additional source separated organics, there's not necessarily as much capacity in the in-vessel composting systems or enough anaerobic digestion facilities. So one of our key conclusions is that there is a lot of processing capacity, but there's definitely a need for additional infrastructure, particularly with some of the overarching goals that the country has in terms of increasing their amount of organic waste diversion, or just waste diversion in general. So we see that, so this figure, if you added up all of the bars here, the total amount of organic waste disposed in 2016, so this is stuff that was landfilled and not diverted, because there is a large amount that's already diverted, but we see 6.8 million tons of food and yard waste were disposed. So that's how much we need more capacity for in comparison of what was processed and through these different diversion technologies was only 4.8 million tons. So there's just not enough infrastructure available right now to be able to process this 6.8 million tons. It already is only processing 4.8. So just in general, the kind of key conclusions from this report, there's a strong push to increase the diversion of organics across the country. Almost all of the provinces and territories had some sort of goal related to this effort. So you can see that there's a clear interest in being able to do that. A lot of people have access, which is great. So maybe it's mostly focused on leaf and yard waste, but there is also still a large curbside collection of source separated organics across the country. In terms of infrastructure, there is some, and it is processing a lot, but more is needed in order to handle everything that's currently being produced and to capture the rest of the organic waste that's currently being disposed of. And so kind of one of the other things that we found, there are other sources of information, similar information even in Canada, the Canadian, the CCC, I can't think of what the acronym is. They have similar information. The federal government has information, but there's just no consistent or transparent way where all of the information in this report is collected, which is really important for being able to drive continued progress in managing organic waste. And thank you, the Canadian Composting Council. And so then the other piece of this is that we did a little bit of a policy analysis, but it's pretty high level. It's at the provincial level. So there's definitely going to be a lot of policy and programs that aren't captured in what we did, which could be other mechanisms for driving improved organic waste diversion. And that is all I have. So I'm happy to take questions if you all have.
Sure. Yeah, great. Thank you for stopping sharing so we can see each other. Well, can you hear me? Yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll start, but I'm sure other folks will have questions. I'm just curious, as you start to work with the U.S. Composting Council on a similar study for the U.S., if you have a sense of what those numbers might look like. I find that Canada is far advanced in terms of some things like this, and I'm going to guess it's not going to be as rosy or as healthy as, let's say that, as healthy as the Canadian numbers.
Yeah, maybe, but there are a lot of compost facilities. So, I mean, we've started putting together the database of facilities, and there are over 6,000 facilities in the US.
Wow.
So how the sizes of them and how much they're processing and that sort of thing.
Who has access to them, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's a lot.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
Did you have a question, Kendall? You trying to? Yeah, there you go. I might have muted you by accident. Sorry.
No, I was going to get my thumb out of the way. Hi, Susie. Thanks for all of this. I'm looking at the the various sources of material in the MSW stream. It's obviously not all ubiquitous. It can come from residential. It can come from commercial. It can come from industrial sources. Looking at food waste in particular, for example. Are you able to do a deeper dive into how much feedstock is coming from residential collection programs versus commercial versus sort of the food industry as a source and and I'll leave it at that. But because my sense is that works in particular are discriminating about the sources of the incoming material and would prefer to be obviously as clean as possible, as
Absolutely.
pre-processed and slurried as possible. And that's more likely to come from industrial and commercial sources than it is from residential.
Yeah, actually, I can try and throw this back up. Definitely, I mean, the amount of food waste, I mean, so the green bar in this figure is the municipal residential, and it's a very small portion of the feedstocks that are being accepted. It is by far the largest is coming from the agricultural industrial, which is really mostly industrial, not necessarily as much agricultural.
And by industrial, you mean like food manufacturers or food
That's correct.
processors? Okay, gotcha.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, certainly we could do a deeper dive on that. I don't have that information on hand, but just if you were to kind of extrapolate from the percentages here, you can see that 60% of it, the food waste, is from that industrial, probably a bit of a cleaner, direct to the facility type of waste.
Hi, Susie. Thanks for presenting today. I wrote down like 3 questions that I was hoping I can ask you. 2 of them are about specifically on-farm digesters, and then the other one has to do with co-digestion. But the first, so I've been using AgStar's database for the number of facilities, and I'm more focused on the on-farm digester facilities, but on AgStar, they identified 273 digesters in the US. And then I know your findings have been different, and you said something that it could be inflated. So I was curious what you can say about that.
Yeah, so we have 108 on-farm facilities, which come from the AgStar database. But because our focus is on municipal solid waste, those facilities could do agricultural residues or something like that we're not collecting information on. So I think that's probably a pretty good resource for the on-farm AD facilities.
And then I know that this wasn't a big focus on the research you were doing in Canada, but how many have you identified on-farm digesters have you identified in Canada?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't actually have a breakdown for that. It was a little bit of a different scope of the study, so we didn't do it that way.
Do you know any resources that would have information like that?
If Nora was still on the call, she would probably be able to direct you. So I can follow up.
Okay, cool.
On-farm digesters in Canada.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the last question I had was about co-digestion, and it was, so you were doing the study on co-digestion, and a lot of them are accepting like waste fog from agricultural and industrial facilities. These facilities, do they have to do you know if they have to dewater their waste fog before they put it into the digester to get optimal solids loading, or is that less common?
Great question.
It is a good question. I don't think our research looked at that specifically, but I would suggest you look at the EPA's anaerobic digestion report, because it has a whole section on pre-processing. So it might have info.
I will check that out. Thank you.
I think there's also some Water Research Foundation work going on related to that pre-treatment type of stuff for source separated organics.
Thank you.
All right. anyone else have questions? This kind of survey research stuff is hard work, Susie. Thank you. Because there's always some, it's tough when you have to rely on the sources for the data sometimes, but
Hard to get people to participate too.
yeah, no, we're conducting a national biosolids survey right now, and yeah, we did better than last time, but it's tough.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions? Because if not, we can give you 9 minutes back of this beautiful day, at least here in the Northeast.